Hey, what is up, everyone? This is Gary A. Swaby here at the Coalition. And this is something new I'm doing here called the Swift Report, where, sometimes we're going to deep dive on particular topics, relating to gaming or entertainment in general, just things like that. And, today is going to be a very special episode because I have a Coalition founder here, the visionary himself, Mr. Anthony Frasier, who is now currently, the founder of ABF Creative. So how are you doing, Anthony?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm good. And I'm the co-founder of Coalition, man. We had the team. I remember the early days, Randy, Ledette Jr., Gary, Rich. I don't think Rich was there at the beginning, but he might as well have been.
Yeah, you might as well.
uh, you know, uh, Everyone, man. We had some legendary times, man, but we won't get into that right now. It's another
Yeah,
topic.
yeah. Speaking of legendary, you've done like so many legendary things since then. Things that we've worked on as well. A lot of great shows that we've worked on at ABF Creative. So, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've been working on currently, and anything exciting, anything new and
Uh,
exciting?
I can't. Well, we've been working on the Ben and Jerry's podcast, which has been really fun. So it was fun to kind of put our skin in the game on that, and so we're moving on from that project this year. Then also, we've been doing a project with Wondery. Wondery being one of the top podcast companies out there. You've been working on that project as well, called The Adventures of Cairo, where it's all about a young black boy growing up in a neighborhood, getting into trouble at school, at home, in the hood, whatever. And yeah, it was fun. It was like we're making like Saturday morning cartoons. That's what ABF is all about. Like, how do we create our own Saturday morning cartoons, but strictly audio? And so that's the kind of fun we like to have.
Oh yeah, and it's definitely been a pleasure, writing on Adventures of Cairo. I'm an assistant writer on that project, and I want to give a big shout out to Octavia Bray, who is the main writer, and I've learned so
Sure.
much just working with her. So, and one thing I'll also say, like I always say this when I talk about ABF, but you have a hell of a audio engineering team, like because the shows when you listen to them, like you really see it in your mind, like you see it playing out, like you can really feel the energy of like the voice actors and the sound design and everything. So
Yeah,
um, they do
yeah. I
great
mean,
work on it.
yeah. Sound engineering has been top of mind for us because I'm an engineer, untrained engineer, but at the same time, I've worked with NPR, I've worked with top magazines in the country, creating their podcasts for them. And so, even though I'm not classically trained, I've learned how to be an audio engineer just by observation, trial and error, and so when I started this company, it was just kind of built off that foundation of just like, yeah, I want to make sure we're prioritizing quality over most things, because I think when people look at new young podcast companies, they usually just think they're just making YouTube channels. When you think about somebody making a podcast today, is really just a YouTube show essentially, and so nobody's prioritizing actual audio. They just prioritize it. Funny, people have podcasts, but they prioritize video. So it's an audio platform, but people, all they do is just snatch the audio from the video file, and that's the podcast. When we do it the other way around. We're going to prioritize the audio, and then there's a video component to everything eventually. And so that's the way we roll, man. And we're in the middle of building a studio now, and so we'll have those opportunities to have video and things of that nature, be a part of our flow now. But we prioritize audio, so that's just what we're all about.
That's amazing, and it definitely like separates. Like you can tell just from listening to an ABF podcast that you do focus on the audio first. And just as a transitioning point here, so like one of the first projects I worked on at ABF, was Raising the Game, which is like a documentary series, and that was all about the life of Jerry Lawson, the untold story of Jerry Lawson, who is the first Black video game engineer who led his own division, and he went on to create the Fairchild Channel F console, which was the first video game console with cartridge, a pause button, and many other like innovations that are kind of downplayed. So you can actually go and check out that project now. It is at Audible. Audible. Just look for Raising the Game, Jerry Lawson. Search for that, and it will come up. But yeah, so that was one of the projects I worked on. That was Anthony's baby that he'd been wanting to produce for many years since he first heard about the story of Jerry Lawson. So what did that project mean to you? Just the fact that we were able to do that and that you released that under ABF. What did that mean to you?
Oh man, it was a dream come true, man. It was a dream come true. When I got the opportunity to create something custom with Audible, and they were like, pitch your stories. I was like, oh, I got one. You know what I mean? Nobody's talking about this. And when we first heard about Jerry, it was like through a meme, online memes. Oh, here's the event. Oops. Sorry about that. It was about memes. So you saw like people were calling him the inventor of the video game cartridge. And then there will always be some people in the comments kind of disputing that, saying, oh, that's not true. He didn't really do it. These guys did it, or this guy did it. And so it was always like cool to just say, hey, look, let's do a project and let's get to the bottom of not just that mystery, but then also just like who the hell is Jerry Lawson as a person? Like, who was this guy? And so that was what was the main inspiration. So.
Right. Yeah. And it was definitely a pleasure to be a part of that project. And I did notice that, after you did that project, like a lot more people started talking about the story and, knowing certain things about the story and everything like that. So it was very important to do that. And that brings us to, the main focus of this discussion today. So, there was this show, I've watched it a few times actually on Netflix. It comes on Netflix over here, The Toys That Built America. And I guess they're, focusing on video games now also. And, this show is produced by the History Channel, I believe. And yeah, so they actually recently aired an episode where they talked about, the history of Atari and also, Fairchild Channel F. They talked a little bit about Jerry Lawson and also his role in, basically paving the way for third-party development on the Atari and things of that nature. So, they actually discussed his story, a little bit in this episode, and you were on that episode as well. They invited you to actually be an expert and talk about it a little bit. So can you first tell us like how that opportunity came about?
Yeah, they reached out. I got an email. You just never know sometimes you get these emails, people asking for stuff. And so I got this email and they were like, hey, I'm from the History Channel. We're looking to do this Jerry Lawson. At first I was looking at the email like what? Is this real? And so I didn't even believe it was real. And this is like over a year ago, by the way, and so this is a long time ago. Well, not a year ago isn't a long time ago, but we're far removed from when I first did it and they reached out. And I said, yeah, I'll join definitely. And the experience is pretty cool. I went to a studio in Brooklyn, shot it in front of a green screen. And they just asked a bunch of questions, like, what happened here and what happened when this happened. And, they definitely listened to our series, Raising the Game, and a lot of their information came from our series Raising the Game. Of course, they have their own independent research, but I have no shadow of a doubt you can tell Jerry Lawson's story today without first touching base with our research, because most of the information we collected you can't really find anywhere else. So, typically, somebody has to at least tap in with us. And so I guess it was just one of those moments where they just couldn't ignore, our contribution to the story. And honestly, our contribution to video game history in a sense, because there was a lot of, people who really study and track video game history who listened to our podcast and didn't refute any of it. if you notice, nobody has ever refuted anything we put out there. If anything, it probably filled in some blanks, if we want to be quite honest, that they might have been trying to fill in themselves. And so, History Channel reached out, and I felt good about it because History Channel's never talked about Jerry Lawson. And so here's an opportunity to kind of put a light on a Black man's contribution to this industry, and I thought that was just for me, a really good experience to be able to do that for sure. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I recall when we were working on raising the game, it was very hard to piece together all of the elements of the story. It was a big job in itself to just kind of piece together all those different elements and events in his life and the creation of the Fairchild, and then everything after that. We had to do a lot of digging and talking to different people to piece everything together. So now, we have that body of work where people can actually just go and refer to that and get all of the information. So yeah, I understand why it was very important to bring you in.
And not only that, we talked to a lot of credible people from that era.
Yeah. Yeah, Alcorn, some of the people who are mentioned on the very episode, of the Toys That Built America, we have them on raising the game, talking, about the history. So a very important piece of work. And, that is why they called you in. And yeah, so I will say, after watching the episode myself, while it's good to see that they are talking about Jerry Lawson and everything, and, they're not kind of sweeping him under the rug, there were some critiques, that could be made about the episode and how they handled his story, and how they even handled the acting, the portrayal of Jerry Lawson. So we're going to touch on that a little bit, now. So how did you feel about, the reenactments that they had?
I was a little surprised, to be quite honest, because a big part of Jerry Lawson story is his physical appearance. That's a big part of his story. You can't tell the story of Jerry Lawson without acknowledging his presence and how that made people feel, how it first impressions when people saw him, things of that nature. Jerry was a 6'4", I believe, 6'3", 6'4", African-American man with a big afro. And he looked like a football player. And what was unique about Jerry was the fact that he had this big presence, but he was the smartest guy in the room. You know what I mean? He was this computer programmer guy, and and he was soft spoken. He was a jokester. So he had this very intimidating appearance until he opened his mouth, and you're like, wait, not only is this guy the smartest guy in here, but he's hilarious. He's the funniest guy in the room. So when I turned on the series, and look, I appreciate them inviting us out and to be a part of it, but I was a little taken aback when I saw that the guy that they used for the reenactment, now they could say, well, it's just a reenactment, but still, the guy that they chose was not only a guy who was small, he looked like he was about 5'1". So not only was the guy small, but the guy was bald, which is so, which is like, as you can see, he was far from the appearance, and and Jerry Lawson was a little bit lighter in his tone, as far as his skin color, it was a little lighter in tone. And in my mind, I was just like, man, they couldn't find anybody that looked like this guy. You couldn't find one person that looked like Jerry. I could have played Jerry Lawson probably. I don't know. Just like you couldn't find one person that looked like Jerry. I don't know. That to me was the first thing that immediately stood out. And I was just like, wow, if I'm, I personally, I know it's just a reenactment and I know it's not like a movie, but I just feel like, I feel like his family would want to see somebody who look like him,
Yeah, and just to add to that, like, I know people will say, it's just a reenactment, it's not meant to be accurate or anything, but I mean, that is like how Jerry looked is a big part of the context, to his history, because, it slightly is a racial thing, because it's like, people have a stigma attached to that appearance. Like when you see a big black man, like that, and just the fact that he was working in Silicon Valley at a time where it wasn't commonplace for people that look like that to be around, So that is a huge significant part of the story. So I do think they could have went out of their way to, they wouldn't even have to go out their way. I don't think it's that hard to find someone who fits, that aesthetic. So I think, they could have done that, and that was a big oversight.
And then the other thing is, look, we know it's a short show. We know it's only an hour.
Yeah.
So when you have that time limit and that time constraint placed on the show, we understand some things are going to get cut. I'm not naive to that. But I do think a lot of people who follow the history of video games would find it very, they will be upset how the story was told, because it made Jerry look like he was a loner, in a sense where like he alone did all of these things. He alone, which is never something that was something that we on our podcast had to discover, because we followed the memes. Jerry didn't do a lot of this work alone, but he was the leader of that department. And so the argument that we made on the podcast wasn't that he did it alone or was the sole inventor. It was the fact that he led the department, but yet got no credit for doing anything, no names on patents, no names on anything. This guy, according to Al Alcorn, sat at the FCC office for almost 24 hours just to get a meeting to approve things. This is the guy who's literally going there physically to these government regulation offices. And yet he's the only person who's never shown up on any paperwork. So our argument was never that Jerry was the sole inventor. And while he did do some things solely on his own, Demolition Derby, innovation on an F8 microprocessor chip, being one of the leaders to actually make the cartridge invention a viable commercial product. Remember, he didn't invent the cartridge, but he made it. He helped make it a commercially viable product. It's like, think of it like this. You can invent a car, but a car doesn't work without the wheels, So, Jerry led the team that actually put the wheels on the car and made it something that can actually drive on streets. And so that's what the F8, that's what the Fairchild Channel F was essentially when it came to cartridges. So yeah, I think when they told the story on the History Network, they left out a lot of the others who were contributors. And in a sense, did I think that was wrong? Yes. But where was the outcry when Jerry's name was left off of the contribution in all the other stories? You know what I mean? Like, Jerry's name has been missing for all this time, and no one put up a fuss. No one put up a protest. But the two wrongs don't make a right, you know? So I'm not going to sit up here and say one is wrong and the other. No, two wrongs don't make a right. You know, I do think that they could have at least showcased that there was a team that he was leading, and even talk about some of those figures. If we want to be honest, you know, these weren't like minuscule figures in the creation of video games. You know, these are people who are which made Jerry Lawson's disappearance from history even that more baffling, because he was surrounded by history makers. Like, how do you disappear when you literally have a team of legendary Silicon Valley legends, you know, legendary engineers, legendary talent. So they messed up. They messed up the story, but maybe they just knew they only had an hour, you know, to tell it. And so they just made the cuts, and, you know, they're, you know, clearly, you know, the gorilla in the room is that nobody's ever told Jerry Lawson's story at all. And so they focused on a black man whose contributions to the video game industry just weren't ever really focused on. And so maybe it was intentional in a sense where, like, hey, we only got a little bit of time, and so we're going to focus on this figure that nobody else has really ever really shined a light on. That could be it too. But here's the fact. There would not be a Channel F if there weren't a Jerry Lawson. That's a fact. If he wasn't in his garage tinkering with the F8 microprocessor, there wouldn't even be the idea of him leading that division at Fairchild in the first place. That's a fact. So, you know, would there be cartridges if Jerry Lawson never did that? Maybe. It depends. You know, Atari might have eventually got to it. You know, that's one thing the show didn't really make clear, is if where did the idea of cartridges really come from in Nolan Bushnell's mind? Did he see that what Fairchild was doing and wanted to beat them to the punch or make a better version? That wasn't really laid out too clearly, you know, in their story, in their version of the story. But yeah, man, that was, you know, I while I enjoy being a part of the project and contributing, I was a little upset that they didn't, you know, make the argument that we were making, because that's the fair argument to make. To go out there and solely give Jerry credit for the cartridge was never the intention of raising the game. Raising the game was to make sure that his contributions weren't erased. And I think that was more important than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it perfectly. They hyper focused on, you know, those things, and they went back to making it seem like he was, you know, the sole spearhead figure that, you know, caused all that to happen. But in actuality, he did work with a team. And, you know, one thing that was also missing was the charm of Jerry Lawson. Like, just because when we interviewed the people who worked with him, you know, they all would talk about how charming he is, how funny he was, how charismatic he was. You know, you didn't really get a sense of any of that. They just made it seem like he was this lonely genius in his garage, you know. So
in his garage, they made Atari look like a nice bustling company, and you know, which it was, you know what I mean? And but dang, yo, like I ain't gonna make it look like Jerry could go into an office. Like, I ain't gonna make it look like he had people there too. Like, you know, it's kind of weird. If you go back and you go on YouTube and you look up Jerry Lawson videos, a lot of the times, even some of the footage that we grabbed for our show, it was him just talking about office life, you know, arguing with the marketing guy, the marketing department, not knowing what the hell they're doing, and him playing pranks on people coming to the office where they would come and press a button and something would come up and slap them in the face. Like, he would make little things like that in the office. So he was the water cooler guy, man, you know. And so for them to kind of like, yeah, like make it seem like this guy was like an introvert, like was far from the truth. But with every bad comes some good, and the fact of the matter is people are asking questions. They'll get the truth if they dig deeper. So people who dig deeper on Jerry Lawson would eventually come across our show, and they'll get that raw truth, not just from us and our perspective, but even from the Alcorns, who they talked about on the. I'm surprised they didn't even talk about him and Pong and I'm surprised I for sure thought they was gonna dig a little bit more deeper on Al Alcorn, but they didn't.
Yeah, I thought he was going to be in it or something. That they must have asked him, but
yeah.
Yeah.
This one guy on the show, man. He's on every series, man. I don't know. I forget this guy's name, but like he was on the episode I was on, and then he was also in every other episode of Toys That Built America. And he's also on almost every episode of Food That Built America. I'm just like, this guy know about everything. Like, who is this guy? Like, yeah, I don't even know his name. Like, it's like I just see him on every episode. I'm like, yo, y'all could have used some of his time up to talk more about the story, man.
Yeah, that is true. And so I there was something else I was going to ask you actually, because watching it and watching your parts, it definitely seemed like there was more that you probably said that didn't make the episode. So I wanted to ask you, like, is there anything you specifically remember talking about that didn't actually make the final cut?
I don't specifically remember, but yes, I spent a lot of time in that chair, man. I talked a lot. I talked a lot. There was a lot covered in that chair, man. They needed to get everybody some shine. They got to have everybody, given a perspective. But yeah, man, I said a lot in that chair, man. Unfortunate that it didn't all get captured. But if you want to hear our version of the story, me and Gary's, definitely check out our podcast. But and look, I might be biased, but I felt like, man, I could have did the whole episode, man. I feel like, with the way I was explaining things, if they could have just had my man look like Jerry, it wouldn't have hurt so much. But it just, but yeah, I think this is gonna open up the door for a movie, for a television series, something, on Jerry Lawson for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Like I'm noticing the coverage on him is getting, like, on TV is getting bigger and bigger, like since we did Raising the Game. So I know Netflix previously did something that was like very short, but since Raising the Game, now we're getting like bigger segments about Jerry. So I feel like at some point we're gonna get something that's more full length, focused completely on his story. And yeah, they're gonna have to check out Raising the Game, for the information. So
they're gonna have to. What I'm happy about, even though, like I said, even though I felt like they could have did a better job telling the story and including more individuals in the story, I am happy that there will be some kids looking at this series and seeing that, yes, it wasn't just a bunch of smart white guys. You know what I mean? Like, like not every technological advancement in the United States has to come from just a bunch of smart white men. Like, there were black men, black women, Latino men, Latino women, women and men of all races and backgrounds contributing to the success and contributing to innovation in the country. And so I'm just happy that, I know it really surprised a lot of people watching that episode. Like, who the hell is this guy? I know some people was like, who the hell is this? I ain't never heard of this guy. Like, how come nobody talked about him? And so that question alone will make people go to Google, type up a few words just to figure out more about this individual. And to me, that's a win. Could they have done a better job on the series telling the actual history of the video game, the pioneering of video games in America? For sure. They could have done that. So Did they do a poor job of doing that? For sure. I don't think I'm going to dispute that. But I have to admit, I'm a little biased in the fact that I'm glad that at least Jerry's name is out there, and people will, hopefully that inspires people to do their research and kind of get the full story on what really happened. And I think it's honestly, I think it's kind of whack not to tell the full story, just to know that he brushed shoulders with Al Alcorn, to know, about Jones, to know about Gene Landrum, to know his interactions with all of these individuals on his team is almost like you're kind of robbing him of his greatness in a way, to not show that he was side by side with all these other men who were geniuses. Kind of robs him of that, of that greatness a little bit, So I think that actually adds to his greatness. The fact that he stood next to these men. Nolan Bushnell said, if there's a video game Hall of Fame, Jerry Lawson should be in it. His own words. So
yeah, it's a fact.
Yeah.
So yeah, he did a lot, man. Like, he did a lot of and even just because they did focus on the Activision Atari lawsuit a little bit. They talked about it just a little. They didn't make it very clear the impact.
Court, man.
Oh yeah, yeah. They stay
today, back then, like everything, man. They stay in the news, man.
Yeah, hopefully Microsoft will fix things for them, but we'll see about that. But yeah, what I was gonna say is they didn't, although they touched on it, they didn't make it clear the full impact that Jerry had on third-party development, because what he did was, because obviously there was the court case over, Atari and Activision. Atari was claiming that they took materials and information from Atari to make, third-party games for the 2600, and they Activision needed someone to prove that they could reverse engineer the hardware to make these games. So that person was Jerry Lawson, and he actually did it. He proved that it was possible, and because Activision was cleared, once Jerry Lawson did that, it meant, it opened the doors for everyone to basically make third-party games for the Atari.
I'm glad they did that. I'm glad that's actually a part of the episode I was really happy to see, because that was one of the moments where you can point to Jerry's genius clearly, unfiltered genius. They needed to reverse engineer the cartridge and found one person who could do it. Now that was undisputable right there. That was unless somebody could come and refute that, they'll hear this podcast. If you could come and refute that, I'll gladly, stand to be corrected. Humbly, I'll humbly be corrected. But until then, Jerry Lawson essentially was the person who made third-party game development a reality in America, in the world. This is a $1 billion industry, and we could definitively say if he never did what he did, there wouldn't be a $1 billion industry today. We can definitively say that. What's crazy is so many ways we could defend it. If he didn't do what he did in the garage, would there be a Channel F? Would there be a cartridge? Would the Atari try to counter it with their own? We could definitively say he had impact then. But then we can also say, man, would there even be third-party game developers if it wasn't for Jerry Lawson? Would there even be? Yeah. That's a question we can legitimately raise, and he made it. He opened the floodgates. Now, people could be mad at him for that too. He could be blamed, essentially, for the downfall. After all of the shovelware flooded the Atari, it essentially almost killed the industry. And so he could be blamed for it too. It's like, so he could be blamed, like, man, you opened that can of worms, and he made a guide. He actually wrote a guidebook on how you can do it. We tried our best to find that guy. We could just not find it, man. But if anybody has that guide or can find it, that is history. I'm gonna try my darndest, and it's probably sitting in his garage somewhere, his son's garage somewhere, and they. But yeah, man, that guidebook. He essentially published a guidebook on how to do it, and that's it. That was Murder She Wrote right there, man. That was it.
Yeah, that's history right there. Because before that, games were made by the same company that made the console. Like
Right,
you could only get the games from them. So people
right,
have to you have to understand how significant this is. Like he made it so that other companies can just make games.
right.
So
They don't have to make the hardware. They don't have to. They could just sit back and just really just make good software.
exactly.
And Atari, of course, wanted to lock that down. It was like, nah, man, first party all the way. That's all that shit.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, man. It is what it is. But overall, if I had to rate the series or the episode, I love the series. But if I had to rate the episode on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it about a 6. I think the production value was great. The theatrics was great. The contributors were great, essentially a little bit. And I just felt like the story the fact that they had to rush through the story really, really hurt a lot of the chances of this being like a really classic, storytelling. So that's my ranking, man.
Well, there you have it. That is Anthony Frasier's rating of the episode of Toys That Built America. So thank you very much for joining me today to talk about this. It was a good discussion. Is there any, do you have any final words, shout outs, or anything you want to plug or talk about, real quick?
Just shout out to the family. Shout out to Jerry Lawson's family, his son, daughter, who allowed us to tell this story in its entirety. And yeah, shout out to History Channel for hitting me up. I think y'all should hit me back up. And let's tell the full story. Let's do a whole documentary from top to bottom. Let's do that. And and hire us to do the casting. I mean, bring us in to do the casting too. You know what I mean? Like we could hook it up for real. So that's it.
Yeah, that's important. But yeah, thank you very much for joining. This is the very first episode of the Swift Report. So, it's a great pleasure to have you, on the first episode.
My pleasure, man.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, everyone, whether you're listening on YouTube or on the podcast feed. Thank you very much. And we will be back with some more content. I'm going to be doing the next one with Mr. Richard Bailey Jr. to talk about God of War. So look out for that. And, if you are on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button. Check out some of the other content on the channel and subscribe, hit the bell icon, comment, all that good stuff. So thank you very much. And I hope everyone has a nice day. Peace out.